Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. Joining the canine unit often sounds enticing to law enforcement officers, but there's a lot of preparation and commitment that's required. I'm here today with Dustin Shutt and Ian Austin to provide insights on what it takes to bring on a four-legged partner to your patrol duties. Ian spent 4 years in the Marine Corps and has served 15 years in law enforcement. He is currently a sergeant for an agency in northern Colorado. Dustin is a former law enforcement officer with a decade of experience in patrol and canine. He's an entrepreneur currently serving his community as a contractor. So one of the issues that I've seen, Ian and Dustin, when patrol officers want to become canine deputies, sometimes I don't think that they really have any idea what it is that they're asking to get themselves into. And so being able to talk about that this afternoon will really help any patrol officer that is looking to get into that type of role, because it's got not just the component of when you're at work, but it's also got a huge at home or family component that goes along with it. And I know that both of you have been very, very experienced in having that. Ian, especially with you right now, still being in that role, and Dustin, you're no stranger to that. So, what do you see as kind of one of the problems that our law enforcement officers face as it relates to being a canine deputy?
I guess I'll start off. I think the biggest thing is it's definitely rewarding, but there's a lack of knowledge kind of across the board and within police departments. Unless you've been a handler, nobody truly understands what you do on a day-to-day basis at home. So that leads to a lot of friction within, at work and sometimes at home.
Yeah, I agree 100%. When I was looking to join the canine unit, there's a lot of cool things that come with it, right? You get a dog, you get your car, you get to go to the cool calls. There wasn't very much I knew about what was expected beyond that. What am I supposed to do if I have an issue with a dog at home? Or how do I prepare to even go down that field? It was kind of watching the other guys and hoping that you can get some of that information and then make your own judgment on whether it's something you want to go down the path of or not.
So I know that you guys got into canine several years ago, a decade ago at least, and I would imagine that the preparation prior to getting into a program like that was probably minuscule at that time. Do you see now that most agencies have something in place to where a deputy or an officer can explore what that might be, what that might look like, or partner a deputy or an officer up with a canine officer, just so they get a little bit of a glimpse of what that life might look like? Or are we still kind of in that day and age where there's not a lot of foreknowledge that goes into it? You just kind of jump into it and it either takes or it doesn't take.
I think there is a little bit more prep. I think it's very incumbent on the officer that thinks they want to do it. The more the effort they put into seeking out the knowledge, the more people are willing to give it. I mean, every handler I work with is more than happy to pass on things and get people involved. You do get some friction from some of the administration sometimes because, again, they don't know quite what's happening. They think you're going to hang out and smoke and joke and not really work. They don't realize how much training actually goes into it. but I don't think there's a few agencies that have started to do some formal processes across the country. I mean, there's been an effort to start up, start people as decoys and helpers and down that path. But again, that's something that the higher ups have to be on board with, because you're taking manpower off the streets, and that's always a big issue. So if if the handlers and the unit itself doesn't explain why this is needed and why it benefits the agency as a whole, then you have that resistance.
I think you bring up a great point with specialty units, and you had kind of touched on it, Dustin. There's kind of that cool factor to it, right? You get to be a part of a specialty unit. You're not running the same shift, out on the same radio calls necessarily that you would be if you were working a normal patrol schedule. But one of the things that I think with any of the specialty units is ensuring that you're doing it for the right reasons. When it comes to a canine program, what are the right reasons? Why is it important to have a canine unit in a law enforcement agency?
I think if you've ever worked and seen a dog work, or a team, a handler and a canine team working, usually it's in a pretty extreme situation, um, some sort of felony typically. And if they're a good working team, it's hard not to watch them. It's got a gravity to it of, wow, this is a pretty cool asset they have. So to be able to be a part of that and develop that tool to do things that humans cannot do. We're not that fast. We definitely can't smell nearly as good, um, and we have emotions that the dogs don't necessarily have when it comes to what they're doing. So the draw for me was being a part of something that was very special, but it was also challenging to myself, making sure I can develop and work with the dog to be the best team we could possibly be.
One of the things that I know with canine units. Now, I've never been a part of one, but have been in organizations. In fact, I've only been a part of one organization that did not have a canine unit. So I've been around them for many years. Um, but I don't think that there's an understanding of the commitment that goes on um, with handling a dog, being a dog handler. Talk a little bit about what what that looks like, not just at work, but kind of even more importantly at home, because most of us as deputy sheriffs, we get done with our work, or an officer work in the street. We put in our 10 or 12 hours, whatever it is, and we go home and we get to turn that off and, either get prepared for the next day or we get prepared for the weekend. But that's not the case as a canine handler.
Yeah, no, the dog's coming home with you, so your family has to understand. Initially, you have to educate your family on this is a working animal. This isn't a pet. They can be friendly and they can interact, but ultimately they have a job to do. So that education starts with when you decide to get on a canine unit and starting there, and then once you get on, bringing the dog home, setting those boundaries with your family. But then you have the home care aspect of feeding, watering, uh, cleaning up messes. Where in your household is this dog going to stay? What are you doing when it's cold out? Um, and then the training aspect of it is training never really stops with the dog. Just because you're at home off work, that dog wants to work. When you get the right dogs, all they want to do is work. So having them sit in a kennel on your 3 days off really isn't an option. They're going to get destructive. They don't sit still. So
I know that both of you have kids at home. What kind of interaction is that like? And have you had dogs that the kids could be a part of the dog's life, or have your dogs been those that you couldn't even have the kids around them?
So when I was working the dog, I did not have a little one at home. Um, so I didn't have that extra dynamic. But in a family situation, there were still kids coming and going through the house, and um, there's always an extra level of protection. Whereas the dog, where fast movements sometimes is not good, and I know Ian's situation was different because they kind of built a family while he was on the unit, right? And so the dog got to bond with the kids as they were growing up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, my daughter was born, I think, like second or third year in canine, so she came up with a dog. Um, I think it's really indicative of what type of unit you're in, where what type of dog you have, right? If the dogs that work for LAPD, Denver PD, the big name agencies that are going out and hunting, violent felons every night, probably not the dog that you're going to want around your kids. Um, but you know, sheriff's office, small PDs where I'm at now, we have a different role, right? We have a PR aspect. Our dogs are expected to be able to turn it on, turn it off, interact with the public, and that is not necessarily the dog that I'm going to take into LA and hunt that violent felon, and I know that. But it's a dog that I'm comfortable taking, to hunt a felon that shows up in my city. And maybe one day it's not, and like you have to be a strong handler to say, we need some other help here, or we're not prepared for this. So, but back to the home aspect. I have photos of my daughter at 6 7 months old. She's sitting in our yard with my first dog and a Kong, and um, dogs know. I think they're right. Unless you have one of those really high strung dogs, they know they turn it on and off, and they know that that's not a threat. It's not a chew toy, and
Yeah. So shifting from kind of family life, if if I'm a deputy sheriff or an officer and I've been with the organization for a little bit, what advice would you give to them before they put in for that next announcement that comes out?
so I think there's a lot of people out there that would say you need to be this proactive officer. You need to be out there getting arrests and all that, and that's not for me. That's not everybody's cup of tea, right? I'm not that guy that is gonna sit and watch a house to get this arrest. I don't. I can't sit there for more than a couple minutes before I have to move on. So I think my advice is be able to handle your business, be able to handle your district, your zone, whatever it is. Handle your calls for service fully. I mean, don't go no cutting corners. When you get on a call, you work it from front to back and to the best of your ability. Um, and then once you're there, um, that shows. If you have time to hunt and you see something, you take care of it. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, and then get involved, right? Like I said, the people that want to get involved get the most information. We're not going to hand out. I'm not going to seek you out and say, "Hey, you want to be a canine handler?
Right.
Come with me," because that doesn't work out, right? In my opinion, it's not an effective recruiting method for specialized units.
Yeah, and I agree with Ian. It's identify internally why you want to be a part of that unit. I think that's important. What's your comfort level around dogs, and what do you know about them? And then from there, building on, okay, does this suit my home life? Do I have a yard to where I can break this dog safely, or am I on the third floor of an apartment? And that can be done, but that dynamic with a high energy shepherd type dog is going to be challenging, and it's also going to be potentially cause some issues with neighbors. These dogs, they want to come home, they want to run around, they want to play. You might be tired, they still want to bounce off the walls. First thing in the morning, they want to bounce off the walls. So why are you doing this, and are you properly suited to have a good environment for it? And then, like Ian was saying, then from there, it's on you to start making those relationships with the handlers and educating yourself further of what's involved in this, the training that you don't get paid for. You know, you get training days. If you're lucky, you get training time on duty. Not every agency even has that, but the extra training, the bonding off duty, which if you're interacting with your working dog, usually you're either reinforcing training or you're working on new training in some capacity, whether it's obedience or playing. All of that stuff to them, you know, is interaction, bonding, but there's a underlying training factor that goes into that. So the emotional commitment, the family commitment, understanding all of those things, as well as, you know, are you supported just because you have a canine program in your agency? Does your agency support it, or is it just something that they have on the books? Because, you know, are they helping you get the food, or what vets are you using? All these other things that is there policies in place to help with that, and the training resources you have within the unit, the team. Do you mesh with that team? Because you're going to spend a lot of time with the other people in that unit, and a lot of time the dog is fun. The calls are fun. Sometimes those training days could be what you potentially dread more than anything else. So what's that dynamic look like as well? A bigger picture type approach.
And Ian, I know that you have worked for a couple of different agencies, one that had a large canine program and presence. And my understanding is the agency that you're in now, you actually started the canine program, and I don't know this to be true, but are probably the only handler in that program.
Yeah, so I started it back up. They had a program previously. The handler moved on to other things, and this is not the norm. That the town actually came to the police chief and was like, "We want our canine program back." He was a little resistant because it is a big draw for money and manpower, and they answered that back to him saying, "We'll do whatever it takes." So yeah, I was able to stand it back up, and I am the only handler currently. It is a small agency, so I don't get a ton of work all the time, but I have to, you know, we don't necessarily always prepare to have a ton of work. You have to prepare for that one call and be ready for it when it comes.
So, in that light, and knowing that, what challenges do you face in a smaller organization or with a one man or person canine program that the larger canine programs you just didn't have those challenges?
You know, training days are obviously, if I'm the one man show, I have to find other places to train or other units to train with. Luckily here in Colorado, and I think it's true across the country, most handlers want to get together and train and have these, you know, collaborative, you know, share different calls, share training methods. Luckily for me, we have a great state association and a good pretty much relationship with all of the canine units throughout the state. So I'm able to go to different agencies, up and down the metro area. And if I really wanted to go the Western Slope, I could go out there. So, but the daily training stuff can get it a little difficult because nobody understands unless I've educated them what I need from them or they've been interested. So I think the day-to-day maintenance training that's not on a training day is probably the biggest hindrance of a small unit.
As both of you have been part of canine units, and you've looked at your career path, what are some of the obstacles or challenges that's presented in terms of promotion or being a part of other like investigations or some other units within an organization?
Well, for me, things changed after I left the canine unit, and largely in part because of what Ian was able to do. But when I was part of the unit, we were canine assigned to a shift, and that was our duties. And so we didn't have as much opportunity to help train other officers in a formal setting, a lot of which was looked at for promotional scenarios. They want that FTO experience. But I also knew that going into it, and it was one of the decisions, part of that background research before you become part of a unit is, okay, I might be giving up something down the road, possible promotion points, what have you, to have this position. And I weighed those, and it was, for me, the right thing to do. Now, that was starting to transition when I was leaving the agency. And then I think you helped become part of doing that in some fashion.
Yeah. So when I started, you were a canine officer, and that was, you really didn't have any options to go outside of that. You couldn't be an FTO, or they said you couldn't be an FTO. I challenged that formally, because we had people were saying if you want to have a voice within patrol, if you want to have a voice of how things are going, you need to be an FTO. Well, I want to be an FTO, but I have this other job, and you look at SWAT guys can be FTOs. So I challenged that and said, well, why not canine? Well, you have a dog in the car. Well, what does that matter?
Yeah.
So I was able to challenge that and move forward. It did make a little difficult to have a trainee, because we're not assigned to a district, so it was kind of a specialty training. But my thought and development was, let's give these trainees a break from running a district. Let's expose them to what else is out there, and how they can help us once they are in a district. It morphed a little bit, you get low on manpower and you got to take a trainee for a whole thing, and it works out. It's a lot of work for you as the handler, if you want to take on those extra responsibilities, because it just compounds, right? You don't, just because you have a trainee doesn't mean everything else goes away. And as far as promotions go, there was one, also a thing. It was not a ton of people were getting promoted out of canine. Typically, you had to move on, do something else. I broke that norm. I don't know how. I just the investigations wasn't something I wanted to do. Still isn't something I hadn't a passion to do. But I think if you show the effort to at least learn that side of it to a degree, maybe not be fully involved, but it's all in the effort you put into it. But you are giving things up, right? You're giving up options to test for certain spots. Obviously, if I want to be in investigations, where's my dog at in his career, and am I going to leave him or her pass him on to a different handler, which is difficult, because you do bond with these dogs. Or same with promotions. Do I want to promote out of canine, and where's my dog at then? Is he at the end of his career? And that can be a factor of when you test for these different promotions and leave canine. Or, are you resigned to, I'm just going to be a deputy and run a dog? And because not every unit has a sergeant that gets to run a dog. And even if they do, it's not multiple, right? There's one sergeant typically that's getting to run this dog, maybe, depending on the size of the agency. So it's definitely something you have to look at. And once you get in, when you get to that point of taking a second dog, when you really have that hard conversation with yourself and your family of, where's this career path going, and do I want to stick with this, and is that okay, or do I have aspirations to move on?
Yeah, and you bring up that point. What typically, in the dogs that most agencies are running today, what is that span? Is it 7 years? Is it 9 years? How long are these canines, if we get them as a I don't know, a pup, or as early as we would typically get a canine? What is their expected work life?
I get that again. Is going to fall back to the agency they're working for and how much work they're getting, and how much their body's getting pounded on, and just like an athlete, right? If they're in a high stress, high impact sport, they're going to wear down faster. And typically you want to, it's going to be based on the dog. I was lucky at the first agency that we worked for. We had a good rotation just based on the number of dogs within our unit that we just put in for one every year. And it just happened that the dogs worked about a 7-year career, and they were rotated out, which when we were getting them at that time, they were typically like 3 years old, 2.5, 3 years old. That's shifted the other way. Now we're getting them younger and younger, unfortunately or fortunately. But I liked that career span of 6 to 7 years. My first dog is still at home. He's an old man now. He's almost 14, but he's still happy, and he got a nice life as just a dog. Took a little while for him to adjust to just being a dog, and we melded that and gave him some fun every now and then. But so it's really up to the agency. I mean, there's some places that'll run a dog into the ground, unfortunately, just because they don't have the money.
Right.
And then there's some dogs that can't transition out of a working life. Maybe their body physically can't take it anymore, but their mind is still in the game, but they just can't. And typically, just like some of our retirees, when they get out of a career in law enforcement, they don't unfortunately last too long outside of that career.
Yeah, great point. All right, I've noticed, and I've been in law enforcement for a couple of days, right? When I first got into law enforcement, got out on the street and was around canines, they all seemed to be German Shepherds at that time, and now there's been, from what I can see, a shift in most agencies to a different type of dog other than a German Shepherd. Talk a little bit about that and why the shift. Did we find something different, or why that is?
The Malinois, is what probably the big one that we've shifted to, or people think we've shifted to. They've been around a lot, and then their shepherds are still used throughout the country. It's kind of fun, like it depends on your trainer. Sometimes your agency. There for a while, Pittsburgh PD was running Rottweilers
for a while.
For like their whole unit was Rottweilers, and that was because their trainer liked them, and they thought, and they worked for, I guess, for what they needed at the time. But the shift towards the Malinois, German Shepherd, my first trainer told me that they wouldn't give a first handler a Malinois when he started because they didn't think they could handle it. And a Shepherd was that calm. Once they were trained, they just kind of autopilot down the road, whereas the Malinois are 100 miles an hour all the time. And they're constantly trying to game it, and they're trying to cut corners, and you have to hold them accountable, which for a new handler can be difficult for sure. But that shift has gone away. And then we've also seen a shift towards more single-purpose dogs in certain areas. So you're getting, you go into labs and pointers and the whole gamut. So
And single purpose is, if you could elaborate a little bit more on what
single
that is.
purpose being they have one job, right? When you think of a police dog, a lot of people think of a dual purpose dog where they do patrol work, they go out, they find people, they bite people, and then they go find drugs or bombs or whatever it is they find. The single purpose dog is going to either just go find drugs or whatever odor they're trained to find, or they're just going to be a patrol dog and go find people.
Yeah, and right now it seems like there's kind of 3 different roles for a dog, and that would be drugs, bombs. We're starting to see that a lot more, people, and then even I've seen that 4th, which is like a bloodhound, that is kind of more of a cadaver type of dog, right? Have you guys had experience with those types of dogs? And do we really even have any of those in the metro area here?
I don't have personal experience with a cadaver dog. I've had a patrol dog become a cadaver dog a couple times, but that was inadvertent. But I think Rampart or some of the rescue, or maybe some of the fire.
Yeah,
There's a
there's
couple in the metro area.
there's
I
Search and
don't-
rescue.
yeah, more of the search and rescue are getting the bloodhounds. At least in Colorado, there's a few agencies that employ them just based on the area they cover. I know Boulder County, Jefferson County both have one. The day-to-day use for a bloodhound for us, I think is why we don't see them as much.
Right.
And it goes back to that demeanor of the dog. We want a high speed, go get 'em kind of dog in the metro area assets, but you get to the mountains and you need more of that dog that can do the longer searches and maybe doesn't get as distracted, more focused. Not saying that the mountain walls can't do that, but they're
Sprinters, not
they're sprinters.
they're not
they're
distance
not the
runners.
marathon, and they can, and that what makes them great in the metro areas and their drive to do that also can wear them out quicker too on those longer searches because they're typically pulling you too, so it can exhaust them, and so it's a lot of the demeanor of the dog, what their uses are for. But all dogs can be trained, working dogs can be trained to identify those things. It just, what tool are you putting in your tool belt that day?
We've talked a lot about kind of the deputy or the officer that's the handler, and when we look at, I'm sure, I'm kind of going back in my head, seeing some of the handlers. There are those that are handlers that probably shouldn't be handlers, and what are the consequences of either, if I'm thinking about getting into that, of me not being the right fit, or from an agency and even a partner handler's perspective, what are the consequences of getting somebody into that unit that really is not a good fit?
I think you have two extremes in that, right? And the handlers that don't fit, right? You have a handler that's there for the T-shirt and the car and all the perks, but not there to run the dog, right? They want that extra day off of training where they don't have to do answer calls. They want the take-home car. They want a little bit extra pay for taking care of the dog. That for an agency is detrimental because nobody wants to call that dog, right? And that's taking a spot for. And potentially a dog that could do these things and making it just null and void, right? They're just a body filling a car at that point. And then you have the other extreme of the handler that is a little too gung ho, and he can be a huge liability, right? They want to go out, and especially on the patrol side, they want to bite anything and everything. They're willing to step over that line or toe over that line, and or even on the detector side, right? They're willing to blur that line when it comes to, did the dog actually alert, or did I make him alert? Am I fuzzing that as well? And that can have dire consequences, not just for that agency, but for the canine unit and the law enforcement world as a whole. Because you look at a lot of the case law that comes out for law enforcement, and a lot of it is canine related when it comes to search and seizure and use of force and stuff like that. So it can be a huge liability to picking that wrong guy.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it when you were talking about it. I think that there's I don't know that it's a misunderstanding, but I don't think that there's a realization as to how much case law you guys that are handlers look at or should be looking at, because I can tell you from a supervisor perspective, I put my faith and trust in that handler's knowledge of what the case law tells us when it comes to being able to release a dog on somebody, because that's a huge use of force that is coming from that dog, and we have to know, as handlers, and then supervisors have to be able to trust in the fact that that handler knows that this is definitely a situation where we're authorized to use that level of force in the apprehension of somebody, knowing that dog may latch onto somebody, and kind of the consequences that are behind that. I know in a larger agency, there's probably maybe a single person that's kind of responsible for looking into that and making sure that they're staying on top of case law. Did you find that to be true in a larger agency? And then obviously when there's just one handler, it's very evident who that falls upon.
I think initially in any agency, it falls on the trainer, right? Whether it be a smaller, even as a new handler, like if I'm starting a program in a small agency, and I haven't had the experience of coming from a large agency, it's on the trainer that I go to be like, hey, these are where we need to be looking. But it falls back on the handler themselves,
Right.
all the time, because they're ultimately responsible for it. And if you're completely in the wrong and completely left to center, the agency's not going to back you, and that's on you. You might be able to fall back on a little bit of training, failure to train, but it's not. They can mitigate that. It's on every handler to understand their case law and keep up on it.
Right. Yeah, and with that case law, you're dealing with an animal that doesn't understand case law, and it's an evolving thing. So you might have enough to get that dog out initially, or do that search, and then just like that, with any use of force, it could change right away, and you'll have to have the control over your dog to recall or back off that use of force. And knowing, okay, I have enough to deploy the dog is one thing, but also understanding, okay, now I got to get that control of that dog and bring them back, because they don't know if someone's given up and you've lost that use of force aspect. Right. You got to identify that, control your dog, maintain officer safety. Some of the qualities I think that make one of the a really good canine handler is to be a good cop. You need to multitask. To be a good handler, you need to even bump that up a little bit more in your situational awareness, your decision making. All of those things have to be squared away through your experience before I would suggest you start down the path of adding the extra stress, pressures, and knowledge to joining a canine team or canine unit.
Yeah, I think the big part with also on the case law side is, every officer has to be able to know when they can use force and all that when it comes to the use of force stuff and articulate it. And I think canine handlers are usually better at articulating their use of force because it is that higher liability, because they are dealing with it's not a baton, it's not out of their hand, right? It's not a beanbag round that once it's gone, it's downrange. It's downrange. It's a split second window that we've made this decision. That dog is out there and constantly doing things that you can't 100% control. So you have to be able to articulate why you were comfortable enough and why you have the reasons to send this thinking being that doesn't understand case law downrange. Yeah,
and to do what it was trained to do,
right?
And hope that it does just that. I don't know how many years you've been in canine, but is there from a career perspective or even a handler perspective, is there a ceiling where you just need to get out of the game?
I think it's going to be dependent on everybody, right? If you start losing the desire and the drive to do the job correctly, just like anything, it's time to move on. I think that's going to be agency to agency, right? If the agency is super supportive of you, you can do a whole 30-year career in canine and be happy. There's plenty of people that have done that, and because they have the support of the agency. There's other people that have done, half a dog and they're done because they don't have the support of the agency. It's very dependent on the environment you're working on, I think.
And I think to build on that a little bit, there's also a physical aspect. Your heart and mind might be into it, but it is one of the more physical demanding positions in law enforcement, in my experience. Um, once you're out, you don't know if that search is going to be, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or until the dog wears out, which could be an hour or more. And depending on your resources, if you have other dogs to break them or not, and the type of call, you're going to push your exhaustion, physical, and the dog's exhaustion as far as you can. So if your knees start going out, your shoulders, um, from those trainings, catching those dogs, the injuries that happen, getting bit by those dogs, those limitations need to be identified as well, um, somewhere along the line, and might have to tap out at that point as well.
So what do you think success looks like for somebody that gets into a canine unit and becomes a canine handler?
I think success is when you are a respected asset amongst your peers and neighboring agencies within the community. And, Ian touched on earlier, Colorado has a really good state program, and that family you acquire once you've been with the canine unit is like unlike anything else. And so I think if you get to the level where you are depended upon and requested, that's what I think success ultimately is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree. When you have other agencies who have canine programs that say, uh, "Hey, when we're out of town or if we're not on, check if this agency is on and see if they can send a handler before you call us out or while we're being called out. If you need a dog on the ground right now." I think that's probably the ultimate level of success in my mind, because they're putting faith in you to bring their guys home. Right. That's at the end of the day with a patrol dog. That's the job, is to make sure everybody goes home. And if somebody's willing to put that faith in another handler from another agency, it's a pretty big compliment.
If you were to give a call to action, so anybody that would be listening to this podcast that has been thinking about getting into that role, what would you have them do immediately to start preparing themselves?
I think the first thing is identify why you want to be a part of that team. And we touched on it before. Can you be dedicated to that team 24/7? We're lucky to have kennels and things, so if we did leave town, other handlers would help us take care of our dogs, which is very important. Because it's not like you can take them to your mother-in-law's house and just drop them off with her poodles and hope that things are going to be okay. So you need to have those resources and know, um, that you can handle all of that. And from there, I think education is the key, and it's going to have to be self-initiated most time. Ian said it great before. Handlers or anything in law enforcement, you're not seeking out people to come join your team very often. It's you got to kind of prove yourself and why you want to be a part of that team. There was a lot of folks we had seen that wanted to be part of the canine unit, but they just want a dog in the car keys. Are you coming out on your days off to work with the dogs, to catch a dog, to learn how to properly be around a dog, and volunteering your time, your effort, cleaning up the kennels, knowing your place as a young handler, um, understanding what the admin expects of you is important, and the support there. Is this program potentially phasing out, or what happens to that dog after you've bonded with it? I've seen it push people out of law enforcement depending on what that bond with their partner happens when they're leaving. So, education is what I think. And doing all those things proactively, building relationships with the unit, and you do all those things, in my opinion, you're setting yourself up for one of the most rewarding positions in law enforcement. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like going home after a rough night. That dog's tongue's dragging, your tongue's dragging. You're feeding them, getting ready to go to bed, and it's just like, cool, you guys are pet, your buddies. You go to that ends your day. It's hard to end your day rough when you're dealing with something like that.
Yeah, quite the bond you guys develop.
Yeah, I'd say to reach out to handlers, whether it's your agency or not.
Right.
Any handlers, most handlers are willing to feed you as much as you can take. So, and then get involved. And like Dustin said, it's right. There's rules within. I can only work so many hours with my agency. Where's the liability? That sort of thing. There's state agencies that you can volunteer for. There's if you really want to do this job, there's ways around it.
Right. There's clubs and groups and stuff to where you can
Yeah.
see what it's like to catch a dog or learn how to become an agitator, which is training a dog. Outside of law enforcement, that you don't want to bring some of those trainings and habits back to your unit necessarily, but early on, it could help you identify if this is something you really want to take on.
Yeah.
Well, Ian, Dustin, I really appreciate your time. I think it's so beneficial just, when it comes to preparation, training, making sure that you're ready for any assignment, whether it's a canine assignment or investigations or SWAT or whatever it might be. It's really important to do your homework. And
Right.
I just appreciate you guys being here today so that those that may have an interest in doing that are a little bit better educated and prepared as to what they might be getting themselves into. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to future conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion. Until next time, stay safe and remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thank you for your commitment to law enforcement. We are honored to be a part of your journey to success. Let's elevate our call to service together.